All right, everybody. This is the official July event for the Atlanta Kubernetes Meetup. Thank you to everybody for coming out, or whatever the virtual analog is of coming out to a meetup. So first thing we always do in these meetups is do a call for to see who's hiring. Generally, that's in the Atlanta area, but if you're opening to hiring remote candidates as well for anything that's relevant in the kind of cloud native Kubernetes space, definitely let us know. Just go ahead and put it into the chat to panelists, and what we'll do is we'll read those out loud and also post them in the show notes after the event. Make sure you include contact information for whoever interested contacts should reach out to. And that's really all we've got for announcements. So, Joe, if you want to go ahead, we'll hand it over to you for the news, buddy.
Sure. Yeah. So, as I was kind of mentioning earlier before we kick this off, there's actually a good bit of news kind of floating around the Kubernetes community and ecosystem at large in the past month. So, it was a tough call, but dwindled it down to some things that I think are cool and important to share with you guys, keep you up to date on things happening in the project itself, as well as everything else in the ecosystem. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And thumbs up, everybody can see, all good? Awesome. So this is our meetup notes. It's available out on HackMD. Also available out in our Git repo. So feel free to always submit any news entries or items that you think are of warrant to bring up here, or any ideas for future talks and things of that nature. So jumping in, Kubernetes release info. Here we got a little bit of an extended code freeze, and that's mainly due to some stability issues that the triage team for this release is still working through for 1.19. I did see that 1.19 release candidate 3 dropped today, I believe. So it seems like they're making good progress through that, but still some issues to work out. That being said, there were a handful of things that I thought were of note as far as pull requests that were merged into the project recently over the past month, and I'm just going to kind of go through those one by one. Some of them are cool features, some of them are cool, but I learned stuff by reading through them, and I wanted to call that out because some interesting stuff there. So let's jump in and talk about implementing server-side apply, upgrade and downgrade. So this is an interesting thing. As part of ongoing process to enhance the way that the apply logic for manifest and resources within the Kubernetes workflow kind of can be have logic applied from both the client side and the server side. Some of those things have make life easier for like idempotent CI/CD workflows. Some of them make things easier for storing things persistently on the back end and etcd. And got into a weird place to where a lot of the existing configuration was stored within an annotation on the resource itself once it was persisted in Kubernetes. And some of the new features adds an actual separate section within the API that calls out the kind of managed by, like, and you can have different things manage different fields. So you can have the kubectl apply manage one field, and you can have the server side apply manage another field. But there was some issues that came up with kind of converting between those things, and always, you know, as a developer, you develop this cool feature and think nobody would ever abuse it this way and like want to downgrade once they've upgraded to this thing. But of course people do, and the Kubernetes community does a pretty good job of making sure that those things are operable and you know, provide a good UX for the community. So this is all about doing that. Really cool to see this stuff be enhanced, the granularity to be able to track not, you know, what tool owns what field in a specific resource configuration is pretty awesome. So the next thing down the list is adding the setcomp least privilege for kube runtime. So this is one that, like, hey, more security, it's always, you know, a better thing, but I learned something in this, and I've done some deep diving on the container runtimes throughout my Kubernetes experience, but there's some things that I just never, you know, it never came up as an issue and I never really dived into. And one of those things that gets called out like very very slightly in here is this concept of a pause container. And I'll kind of talk about what that pause container is and then why it's important to this PR. But the a pod gets provision, the container runtime will take the images listed within your pod definitions and deploy those, and they share the same like network namespace and process namespace and such. Well, there's also this little container that gets deployed automatically called pause that sets up those namespaces to be shared within the other containers deployed within your pod. It's a really cool thing. Now, getting back to this PR here, is there were some conflicts in locking down the seccomp profiles for the pod versus the containers. And if you wanted to lock it down for the pod, you still had to explicitly allow some different syscalls in because applying the seccomp profile at the pod layer also applies it at the container layer. And this change gives a little bit of granularity here to where you can not have to explicitly call out and extend the kind of risk surface by allowing additional syscalls just for the pause container here. So really cool, working towards being more secure, always a good thing. This next one is pretty interesting. So generic ephemeral inline volumes, and that's a lot of words to kind of talk about some stuff going on in the storage landscape for mainly targeted at like persistent stateful workloads, but it has some general other applications that are more general there. So this is a little bit around adding additional volume types that can be specified in like the volume claim, or similar to the volume claim templates field in stateful sets. So every pod will use the template to construct a unique PVC and can provision arbitrary storage and anything else hooked in with a CSI plugin. Same cleanup, lifecycle pieces happen with, the pod is deleted, the PVC and PV are removed and stuff like that. But this like pairs well into some of the existing ephemeral volume support in the CSI interface and makes some a kind of cool stage for some future things for like CSI backed implementations of like empty dir volume types, exposing new or non-traditional storage types like network attached memory disks, all kinds of stuff like that, volumes based on the like downward APIs and config maps and things like that, where you could actually have the volumes be like kind of share that uniqueness of each pod like a stateful set does. So pretty interesting stuff there. All right, now this is one of my favorites. And I think most of us working around in the Kubernetes space, at least on the platform side, maybe not on the developer side so much, but we look at these things in our Kubernetes clusters and each of our nodes, they have this like many to one concept where there's lots of pods and containers and applications and services that run on each of the worker nodes in our clusters. And there's still some times when you get into low-level debugging that you need to log into a node to triage something or investigate where maybe you've got a hole or a gap in what your metrics show you and different things of that nature. So kubectl debug has been something that's been in the works for I think the last 2 Kubernetes releases as kind of an alpha feature. And what this particular PR does is it adds support to essentially spin up a debug pod for a particular node that does all the proper mounting of the PID space and the network space and things of that nature. So you can essentially interact with that pod like it is that node. So this removes the requirement of having to SSH into a node and do things like that. So it really enables us to move to like a kind of completely ephemeral, very secure lockdown mode with our Kubernetes nodes to where we don't have to worry about additional tools for troubleshooting and stuff like that, really brings in the pod as the tool concept, especially with some of these capabilities of being able to share the same PID namespace and everything. So really, really cool functionality here. Can't wait to see what else comes in this space down the road. Emission webhook warning. So this is one that I personally requested like a long time ago. I'd say probably 2 years ago as I started delving into the emission webhook space. And Jordan had some ideas and was able to put this together, and it's finally been merged. So this is really cool and exciting. But if you're not familiar with the Kubernetes admission controls concept, there's the validating admission control and the mutating admission control. And this typically comes up in the space of like the validating admission control, where you try to do something, you apply a resource to the Kubernetes API, and it's going to give you an allowed or denied response back, right? Well, typically that response of deny is the only time that you actually get direct feedback in what you're trying to do. So if you run kubectl apply, you know, my cool deployment, and that gets blocked or denied by an admission controller, you'll get that message back that says blocked by this admission controller and a message from that admission controller. But it doesn't really provide anything, any other mechanism to give you feedback. Like maybe there's a soft deny. You don't actually want to block the person, but you do want to alert them in some way. So this feature here provides a generic interface to kind of bubble up messages from the admission controller to the end user for scenarios beyond just a deny or a failure in that. So really, really cool stuff there. All right, so moving down through here, this was kind of a funny one, and I did think it was a joke when I first saw it, but it's not a joke, it's a real thing. It's the shell operator. So hopefully at this point in time, most people are at least you know, somewhat familiar with the concept of an operator in the Kubernetes space. Typically, in its very simplistic form, a combination of a custom resource to define what your object type is, and then a controller that can kind of watch and manage the lifecycle events for that type of object. So most of the traditional tooling around building operators is been centered around the Go programming language. And there are some other tools out there for Python, but a lot of like our CI/CD pipelines, and a lot of our other tools are kind of just quick little shell scripts, right? And so we have a lot of those things laying around. Even the Kubernetes project is glued together by a ton of bash scripts. So this provides a framework to take your existing, you know, bash scripts and essentially build them into an actual legitimate running Kubernetes operator, which is really cool. I'm not going to go into a bunch of details. Again, you know, we got the links out in the Meetup notes, so feel free to peruse through that. But it's a pretty cool little project. So one other thing, this is cool. So I won't always recommend Twitter as like a source of information and things of that nature, but this is something that I kind of saw birthed on Twitter. And I've had some conversations with Tim back and forth on Twitter at different times over the past year on kind of hot takes on different networking topics, specifically with Kubernetes, of course. And Tim took a lot of those conversations that he's had, you know, across Twitter, at KubeCons, and elsewhere, and kind of boiled those down to two different slide decks. And these are pretty cool. I think I have these. Yeah. So these are like from two perspectives. One, to identify the common patterns for networking in Kubernetes. Like, let's not even talk about anything that exists outside of Kubernetes, but just how do you handle networkings for pods and services and nodes inside a Kubernetes cluster? And what are the different ways that that can be done across different cloud providers, on-prem and such, right? Very, very simplistic definitions here, goes through a lot of scenarios, not necessarily meant to be exhaustive, of all scenarios out there, but really, really good. If you find yourself struggling to understand some of these things, or want to kind of look at some of the pros and cons of each different method of why you might go one direction versus another, these are really good. The second of these decks goes into bringing traffic into your Kubernetes cluster. So this gets into, you know, your service type load balancer, your ingress controllers, your service meshes, like different things of that nature of bringing the traffic to your clusters. And much like the first topic, there's tons of different ways to do that across all the different cloud providers and on-premise, you know, places out there. So really good reads, breaks everything down really simple. Really cool to see that being done and contributed just kind of for the good of the community out there. The next piece I'm not going to spend really any time whatsoever on. I feel like it was big. And it's an interesting thing. And this is Google's decision to move some of the artifacts of the Istio project under a new kind of open governance model and start a new open foundation, which is the Open Usage Commons. Some other projects that I believe most of them were Google backed also moved in there. So just kind of a new emerging thing in the community, something to keep an eye on, read up about it. And then last but not least here, so if you guys don't know, the TGIK, which is Thank Goodness It's Kubernetes, it's a program that started with Heptio and Jobita and has branched out from them. And since Heptio got acquired by VMware, it's now part of VMware's cloud native space. And it's a weekly video series where one of the folks or a friend of VMware kind of takes a topic or a product in the cloud native space and breaks it down and just kind of hacks away at it for an hour or two. It's really interesting to follow along with. And a lot of what they do in that series has sparked how we manage our meetup notes and different things of that and whatnot. But it was just really cool because they specifically gave our meetup here a shout out, probably because Dan's here. But it was really cool to get some love from them. You know, keep it up. Thanks for everybody, you know, continually to come out and support these things. We love doing this. We love having people to do it for and with. So that wraps up this month in Kubernetes. I'll hand it back over to you, Alex.
Thank you for doing the news, everybody. So this is normally where I would read the community hiring calls, but unfortunately it doesn't look like anybody has posted any. So I will be selfish and say that I am currently hiring for systems engineers at SalesLoft. This is kind of a platform engineer profile, heavily involved in Kubernetes tooling and running Kubernetes for the organization. If you want to talk to me about it, you can find me on Twitter, AlexB138, or Tech404, which is the Atlanta Tech Slack, or on LinkedIn if you're the kind of person who uses LinkedIn. For other folks, if you missed the call and you do want to advertise that you're looking to hire people, you can open a PR to the Kate's ATL GitHub repo. It's an organization on GitHub. Every event has an entry there. You can just make a PR to that, and we'll read it at the next meetup, or it'll also be persisted on HackMD. Okay, so that's it for the hiring announcements. So our first speaker today is a community member, a longtime member of the Meetup, Mr. Eldon Stegall. You all know him and love him. He's got a glorious beard, and he's coming to talk to us about 10 minutes with the Typhoon distribution today. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Eldon.
Thanks, sir. Let me see if I can get my. Can I get a thumbs up? Cool. All right. So this is really 10 minutes into Typhoon. Typhoon is probably the least known of the Kubernetes distributions. So I'll talk a little bit about why I started experimenting with it, where I'm at, and what I hope to get out of it. So, all right, who am I? Been years in the Atlanta software industry, mostly security adjacent, usually small companies. So I'll start with the problem statement. This is a screenshot of a service that I run for one of the local security communities. Basically, the idea is we have a system here where you can log into with a VPN, and we have active targets that you can attack. So you click on the 192.168.5.3, and it'll take you to a blog which we know has vulnerabilities. This is something that we've been running in person for a while. This is the DC 404, which is the local DEF CON group, and 2600, which is one of the Atlanta, sort of phone enthusiast groups, if you will. So anyway, this is something that's just out there. And right now it's running on a big honkin' R610 in a rack somewhere. I wanted to change that. So the next part of the problem statement is I have an eBay problem. And this right here is something that I recently got. It's thin terminals, actually. So these are small boxes. They're just built to sit right next to a monitor and let you log into a Citrix installation, or maybe even a VMware installation somewhere to use a virtual desktop. So I picked these up for 10 of them for $150. So that's about half the price per for a Raspberry Pi, 2 gigs of RAM, and a real BIOS. All right, I don't see any Kubernetes yet. Where are you getting? All right, so the point of this is to run those machines, those virtual machines that are running on the big honkin' R610 in the colo somewhere on one of these thin clients. The goal is to use Wake on LAN and Pixie to do the deployment of these virtual machines. We want to use a declarative infrastructure to manage it, and we want to monitor. So I want to do this on these machines. There are not a lot of Kubernetes distributions that target machines with like 2 gigs of RAM, but this one is one that is functional. It's Typhoon. It's I would say one of the very few, if not the only, sort of free as in freedom Kubernetes distributions. It's basically it seems to be the pet project of a couple of the former CoreOS guys, Hubble, who I think is at Lyft now, and a couple of the other folks. It does have a GitHub repo that's pretty active 4 days ago. Yeah, it comes with a lot of goodies built in, so you can use various networking policies. It comes with TLS, RBAC, and you can also install Ingress, Prometheus, Grafana, and other add-ons. So you can use Fedora CoreOS. You can also use Flatcar Linux to do this deployment. So we've got an open distro for Kubernetes, installable on bare metal via Pixie, and based on Flatcar Linux. So we're going to use Flatcar Container Linux, BusyBox UDHCPD. This is basically the thing that, for those of you that aren't familiar with Pixie, Pixie is a protocol where you have a computer with no operating system, and using DHCP, which is the usual way that we get on coffee shop networks and everything and get a new IP address, it will give those machines basically an entire operating system image. And so we're going to use UDHCPD to do that, and then DNS mask to name the nodes. The new components for me were Matchbox. Matchbox is something that you can use with Terraform to manage a fleet of these Pixie images, and then the Container Linux config Terraform provider. So the flow is a new machine, Pixie boots to Flatcar Linux in memory. It installs Flatcar Linux to disk, adds a customization file, and reboots. And then Terraform SSH provisions the machines with certificates and starts kubelet. We're done. All right, so do you need bare metal to do this? Not at all. We're going to do this on VMs right now, if the demo gods are kind. And so basically, if you didn't know, you can provision a number of different cloud bare metal instances. Amazon has some, Google has some, Packet.com is another cloud provider where you can get bare metal images, where you can run a whole suite of VMs on that single sort of compute instance that you're buying from them. So, but I'm going to be doing this on that rack-mounted machine out there somewhere up by the Braves Stadium. All right, so let's see what's going on here. Can people still see my screen? Or you got a terminal right now, or you got the browser?
Terminal.
Terminal? Okay. So what we're doing here, and you can see my previous destroy there, what this is doing, generally speaking, is we're going to reach out. We're going to create a bunch of TLS certificates, which is, of course, how Kubernetes lets nodes into the infrastructure. And then we're going to provision them all inside Matchbox. Along with that, we're going to set up a couple of different machine profiles. And once I get this started, then I'll go to the Matchbox Terraform config, and we can look at that a little bit. So here's the Terraform config. What it boils down to is, generally speaking, it's this Typhoon module right here. We've configured 2 machines, node 1 and worker 1. Node 1 is going to be our controller. Worker is going to be our worker node. And I've added a kernel argument here, which is coreos.autologin. So like normally when you're working with CoreOS, it ends up with an SSH key somewhere. It's kind of hard to manage when you're on a VM. You get to the screen and you can't do anything. So this should be provisioned now. Let's see. All right. At this point, if you look at the documentation for Typhoon, this is where we start the VMs. So I'm going to switch over here. You can see this is the initial node VM. We're going to connect it to the Linux bridge, which is kind of like a virtual Ethernet switch on a Linux machine, and it's going to start up this virtual machine. So let's see what happens. What? Let's try it out. So what we should see over here this is Matchbox. So in a minute, and I may run out of time here. Here we go. So this is the machine booting. It gets the initial iPXE firmware. Then it gets its, and this is something that I would highly recommend. Normally it would download it from the internet. You can use an assets directory, and Matchbox will use that assets directory to serve its Flatcar Linux images. So let's see, still no display, bummer. But anyway, what this is doing right now is this is laying down the operating system. And what we'll see here is we'll see these are two tasks in Terraform that what they do is they wait for the Terraform, for the machines to come up, and then they will provision those secrets and start kubelet. So let's see if we can get the other image up. We should be able to, not there yet. This does take a minute. But this is the DHCP lease that's been handed out to that machine. Ah, there we go. So this basically means that the OS has been installed, and we're going to try, well, this means the OS is getting installed. So we should now be able to, I know what the, starts SSH on a non-standard port during the initial provisioning phase. So here we are on this machine. We can see here, we're installing Flatcar Linux on the hard drive. And so this is, essentially what's going on the system right now. As soon as this install is done, we'll end up with a fully functioning Kubernetes controller with TLS certificates installed. So I think it's really cool stuff. I'm not completely done yet, but if folks are interested, I'm going to put this up on GitHub, and please let me know if you would like to contribute, or if you have any interest in security, blue teaming or red teaming. Feel free to come to either one of those other meetups and poke around with these boxes. One of my other goals is to get KubeGoat, which is an intentionally vulnerable Kubernetes distribution running inside that virtual environment in the near future. So that's my talk.
Nice, very cool, man. Thank you for coming out and showing that to us. I'll clap for the crowd. Cool. And if you want to PR your notes into or your slides into the show notes, they'll be up there available for everybody. Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Eldon. So up next we have Mr. Dan Bentley here to come and talk to us about Tilt, or more specifically Cloud Native, and how it broke development and how he intends to lead the charge on fixing it.
Cool. Yeah, well, thanks for being here. I'm going to try sharing my screen, and hopefully y'all can let me know when you can see it. Oh, I'll be honest, this is actually my first time presenting since we've kind of gone into lockdown. And so I normally, tell people I want to be interrupted with questions. And I guess it's hard to just shout things out in this format. But oh, if you don't understand something, I guess you can ask a question, or maybe there's a raise hand button, or throw tomato or whatever, because I really want this to be useful for you. So
yeah, please post your questions in the chat, and one of the panelists will interrupt Dan on your behalf.
Oh, good. Excellent. So yeah, I'm going to talk about how Cloud Native broke dev and how Tilt fixes it. I'm Dan Bentley. This is the Atlanta Kubernetes Meetup, such as locations are nowadays. I maybe got the date right, and D Bentley on Twitter, or Dan at TiltDev, Dan at tilt.dev, which, yes, .dev is a domain, a TLD. So I'm Dan, and I'm a toolsmith. I was the first person working full-time on build tools at Google. Before that, there were lots of far smarter people working on it, but they also had day jobs, shipping a search engine or an advertising platform. And now I'm doing a company called Tilt. It's an 8-person startup, tilt.dev, and at tilt_dev on the Twitter tubes. Oh, and I posted these slides on my Twitter at dbentley if you want to follow along, though I'd encourage you not to go too far, because there are reveals and surprises and fun, so trust the narrative. I live in Brooklyn. Fun facts about me: I have 2 checks from Donald Knuth for finding heirs in his books. I opened for The Who. They're a British rock and roll band formed circa 1962. So that's about me, and I haven't been interrupted yet, so I'll keep going. Kind of what do I want you to take away from this? If you use Kubernetes in prod, I think you need Tilt for dev. And we'll get into some finer points of that, and I think you can get other tools that are, if you don't like awesome things, you want something that's just good, that can be like Tilt, but still really help you in this new world. So, to set some context, I know that so much of Kubernetes and what the community talks about is about production or staging or things that are running in a data center. And there's this term, in the industry, and analysts use SDLC, software development lifecycle, that talks about how software gets written, but it often starts with like, all right, there's like a pull request or a change ready, and it's like, how do you get it from being merged to going to production? And I spend pretty much all of my time thinking about the inner loop as you're editing, as you're saving files, before you push, before you commit, before CI. Some people call it local dev. There's no good term for it, which is why I have to spend a dang slide talking about it. And for inner loop, seconds and fractions of seconds really count. And even though Kubernetes is so much better than any way I've deployed before Kubernetes in terms of being fast, CI, CD, Kubernetes, these are all more about like batch jobs and scale. And to me, it's about email versus IM. Yeah, they're both about communicating, but like the scale and the latency and how interactive it is really different. And so I just want to set that conversation where I'm sorry, I know lots of great Kubernetes community members are way more on the ops side, and I'll even apologize for some of my dev brethren who kind of go, oh, I just merge the code and then, let ops sort it out. But I hope you'll get some good stuff here too, because the law is about how to, harmony and puppies and cupcakes and all sorts of good things. So my co-founder Nick and I started this company kind of on the idea of how can cloud help the inner loop, right? Why are we still lugging around MacBook Pros and they're not even good enough? Why can't we have a MacBook Air or an iMac and like do all the beefy stuff in the cloud? And as we started digging in and making, some sample products, we actually had this realization that, it's kind of good for us, but bad for the industry that cloud already hurts the inner loop. And so there's a lot we can do without having to, do something huge. And that's kind of weird. How has cloud already hurt the inner loop if you haven't changed what you're doing? And so I think if you ask a lot of people, hey, what's the developer experience on top of Kubernetes like? The first thing they might call out is YAML, and maybe YAML a couple more times. Image builds and how they can be slow. How, it can take a little bit for a pod to schedule. How you can, when you do deploy something, you just kind of goes, okay, I know what to do, even if what you told it to do, it can never do because it won't be able to schedule and you have to go dig in. And those are ways that like Kubernetes itself, some of the ways it set things up hurts the developer experience. But I think actually lots of times when we think about the Kubernetes developer experience, lots of the things aren't the fault of Kubernetes. And we actually kind of have to follow one more domino to fall, which is that new infrastructure enables new architecture. So once you have Kubernetes monitoring, observability, CI/CD, it's easier to do things that before were, just too difficult. And so cloud native app architectures, where you're actually using the cloud native patterns, and there are so many different terms that you can have for this, and everyone has kind of different feelings about which are good or which are bad terms. So I'm just going to avoid all of them and say multi-service. I've heard so many places say, hey, our ops team is so great that now it's easy for us to spin up a new service where it used to take many months. And so I think actually a lot of the pains that you encounter when you're developing an app that runs on Kubernetes aren't from Kubernetes itself. They're from this new architecture where just trying to run the whole app is harder. Hey, I've changed a file. Which binary or binaries do I have to restart? Is there an error somewhere in my system? And maybe you can tell it because when you're reloading a page, it's not a page anymore. All right, well, where's that error? And, even once everyone knows how to use the app as you have it, when you go and you add a new service, you suddenly have to convince everyone to do something different. And, they get annoyed at you on Monday when they come in and, now things are different. So I think really when we're talking about what the developer experience is like when you're building on top of Kubernetes, it's this somewhat hastily composed nearly Venn diagram where there's actually these two related but a little separable contributors to the pain of both Kubernetes itself and just this new architecture. And so I'm going to try and say big ways we've seen teams who are building Kubernetes do the inner loop of dev. If you have a completely different way, I'd love to hear it. So, and I maybe revealed this. Right now I think there's a bunch of broken things and bad incentives and no good choices. And so there's this quote from Anna Karenina of each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So I can't tell you with like 100% accuracy how your team does it, but I'm guessing it falls into maybe you have a start.sh or some kind of custom tool that like starts your whole app. Maybe you just have a whole bunch of different terminal tabs and some wiki page that says, start the backend with these flags in tab 1, and then GraphQL in tab 2, and Postgres in tab 3, and so on. Maybe you're just playing 20 questions with kubectl. You're not seeing anything, but you can like dig in and guess, and that's in many ways similar to the tabs. You have to be manually spinning the plates and figuring out. And I think this is a real indictment in the sense of like, wait, what happened to developer tools? Aren't we supposed to be this great kind of lazy where we have programs that help us write programs instead of having to hit the right button and play whack-a-mole? And I think this is getting at how cloud native broke dev. So many of our developer tools were built for monoliths, where you can have one command to start your app as a build tool, and one command that will update the app, or none if you're using a dynamic language that just will reload each time you request. You have one place to look for problems. Hey, something threw an exception. There's a stack trace at the bottom of the screen. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. I mean, I guess if you're a consultant, you're still collecting $200 and good for you, but you're able to know what to do. And I think what we saw is for decades, there was this pattern of apps got bigger by the binary getting bigger. And as that happened, build tools got so much better at optimizing and distributed builds and caching and downloading releases and prefetching. But multi-service introduces new workflows that don't fit into the constraints that allowed the optimizations. I've working at Google, I'm familiar with Bazel, their build tool, and they're so much. My phone just woke up because it thought I said "Okay, Google." Wow. And so like Bazel is all about like files in and files out, and you have functions. And well, what happens when you don't just have a file? You actually have a running service that can get into a wonky state. And I'm getting a little abstract. And so maybe you're saying, but Dan, can you explain this concept with video games? And I'm a little hopeful that I'll be able to then deduct video games. So I think like with a monolith, when you have one binary, that binary is the protagonist, and doing dev on a monolith is first person. Here's a screenshot from Doom, one of the first person shooters. And there, you have one character and you're taking them around, navigating and exploring and maybe blowing stuff up. Whereas multi-service development, you now have a bunch of different characters. In the same way that like a steering wheel is a good way to drive one car, but you don't want, you couldn't control 100 drones with 100 steering wheels, right? You just, maybe if you were an octopus, but I'm not. You need a different level to be looking at the problem. And so on the right, this is a screen grab from Warcraft 2, a strategy game where you have lots of different units and you aren't so tied up with one. You're able to get the higher level bird's eye view. And I want to be clear that I think, video games, the violent ones are common, but maybe another way to put it is that like monolith dev is The Sims, where you have one or a couple people, whereas multi-service dev, you really need something more like SimCity, where you're able to understand the whole picture. And so I'd say that, you know, as you go and you have this new level to think about, it requires a new tool. Tilt is the tool for that level of microservice dev, and also Kubernetes dev, which, as we've talked about, is, you know, overlapping, but not exactly the same. And again, I am just saying words, and it's a little weird to not be having you know, laughter or as many nods or boos. So if there's anything I should interrupt for, I'm just going to extend this sentence a bit more needlessly. All right, I'll keep going. So I'm going to talk and, more importantly, show ways that make me think that Tilt, or again, a tool like Tilt, but less awesome if you find its amount of awesomeness intimidating, can really help you as you do multi-service development. It operates at the right altitude to handle multi-service workflows. It's optimized if you're using Kubernetes. It's open source. Onboarding, and I'm going to set up but not spoil a joke involving a celebrity for how to onboard. And it's also, and this is maybe a little weird because this is the Kubernetes Meetup, but it's great for non-Kubernetes dev. And I think something a lot of teams don't know how to talk about, and I'll dig into a bit, is like, should Kubernetes be involved in your inner loop of dev, and how? And I think Tilt's even more than a tool, it's a product. And I'll get at all of that. So Tilt works at the right level. And I'm going to try and switch back and forth between a presentation and a demo, and we'll see how that goes. So you can start your app just by running Tilt up in your terminal. Tilt's just a binary Go and TypeScript. And then you can see all the services. So here's Tilt. And what you can see here is I have different services that are making different logs. If you view something like Docker Compose, this main piece is pretty similar to that. But you can also see there's different services, and you can slice and dice into the logs and even see the status. Here they're all green, but you can, oh my goodness, the Zoom controller takes up the top of my terminal, and so it's a little difficult to, or of my window, so it's a little difficult to click without Zoom hiding it.
There's a tiny arrow on the left of it that you can put it in.
I see. That's amazing. Thank you.
Okay.
So what you're seeing here is that the demo is not working, so that's interesting. And so I'm going to continue talking while I go to my terminal and just it got I'm just going to kill that Tilt and start it up again. And so now you get more of the full experience. I was maybe trying to hide, trying to gloss over, not hide, where you can see that Tilt is starting up all of these different services. And it's running them. I'm using Docker for desktop, but you could just as easily be using a cluster in the cloud. And so you can see that Tilt even, is showing you all of these different services, and maybe trying to do it. Oh, maybe this is better now. So we made a little sample project that, great. This is now working again, which is fantastic. You can pick an image, and why would you want to just color it? Well, our developer advocate L Corbs likes the movie Terminator, and so you can apply these different filters, and what you end up with is an effect that resembles the interface from Terminator, where we've changed the color and added a glitch and done object detection. And this is just a little sample app. It's open source, but the reason I'm showing you this is because now, now if I go into my code, you can see that here what the filter is doing is it's keeping all of the red, none of the green, and none of the blue. So if we want it to, instead of being red, be yellow, I can just edit that, hit save, and then in Tilt, you see that the red service just updated and restarted. And so now I can apply the color, and red plus green is yellow. And so now the service is yellow, and I'm able to just, sorry, I'll go back to presenting. Be able to see all the services. And when I change a file, update the right services. And you can see that in that interaction, Tilt stays up and running, which is like Kubernetes itself. It's a control loop. And unlike a build tool, I didn't have to run a different command, and that lets the tool be smarter. You can separate services and get peripheral vision. When there's a problem in one service, it's red in the sidebar, instead of you having to play 20 questions or notice a problem. And lets you zoom in and then zoom back up to a high level without losing your awareness. Tilt handles multi-service workflows. So you can see here, there's a bunch of different services, but you can also add actually your own workflows. So for instance, an environment check that will just start Tilt out being red if you have the wrong version of Helm or Golang installed, or if a repo is out of date. We use it, so in this app, I can upload a photo. Here's a photo of one of my cats. And now when I go back, you can see that's in the database. But maybe I'm trying to go from the beginning. And so if I go, there's actually here a flush database, and I can manually click and it will run. It just is running a command, which we have a very simple database. And now your app is back in the initial state. Unit tests, that's something you often want to do. And if you're seeing a problem in your app, you maybe want unit tests. I'm calling out integration tests, and it's really easy to go like, hey, Dan, those are just unit tests, but they take longer, right? And I think actually, no, so many integration tests that I've written are like pages of setup and like a page or two of teardown, and then just a little bit of logic that's like run this query and like diff the results against a golden file. Here, you're able to actually use Tilt as what sets up and keeps everything in the right state as you modify your code. You can also then, yeah.
Quick question. This one's for me. So a lot of what you're going through and talking about as far as the feature set with Tilt here seems to overlap a little bit with some common things that I would have in like my CI process. So like, I don't want to like have to write some stuff for like my local dev and then have some different stuff for my CI process. Like, is this all implementable and like interoperable with like my CI process?
Yeah, so we have a Tilt CI command. We also will talk about, oh, thank you. I really like that question, because what you're getting at, if I'm hearing it correctly, is like, hey, are you telling me that I can like maintain, two similar but like different experiences, that sounds awful. And what I'm saying is, yeah, that would be awful. And there are a couple ways. One is to run tilt in CI. Another is to have the scripts that tilt runs to like perform a unit test or an integration test be the same script that you invoke in CI. And so like, if I can ask you, yeah, for like 6 slides, I think we'll get to this even a little more perhaps too obliquely. So please keep the pressure on. Great. So we said that Kubernetes, when people say the pains of doing Kubernetes development, it involves multi-service pains and Kubernetes pains. And then we've just talked about multi-service pains. But tilt also is, yeah, I mean, Kubernetes is, yeah, the 800-pound gorilla. So tilt talks to your Kubernetes cluster, whether it's, a fake one on your laptop, Minikube kind, Docker for Mac, or one in the cluster, like GKE, or just one you're running yourself in AWS, to be able to display the status of a pod, or how the rollout's going. But I think the big one is you shouldn't have to do image builds all the time. So Tilt has live update to recognize that image builds add lots of overhead, right? There's just a lot of different steps to them that each can add a second or more. And so Tilt can actually connect to the running containers and modify them. And please, you should only use this for dev, not for prod. And in fact, Tilt has things to make sure you don't connect to a prod cluster with it. And you can update file contents. And there are a few different tools that do this, like Ksync or different tools that are built on top of that. In Docker Compose land, people use, you mount the path in. But live up, and in fact, as I was demoing, you can actually see that, this is copying files into a container. And so that's how it's able to do it in less than a second, instead of having to do a whole image build. But you can also run commands. So you can do this with not just Python or JavaScript, but compiled languages. And you can run the build steps either on your dev machine, like your laptop, or in the container itself. And you can also fall back to the image build to get back in sync instead of being stuck with a bad state. And this is, I'm just calling this out with its own slide, because a lot of people go, for a lot of people, having fast development for Kubernetes is a killer feature. Yeah, Tilt's open source, of course it is, but to me, but lots of people don't get that. It's on GitHub, it's been open from the beginning, and it will stay open. So this is, how do you start using Tilt? Well, you configure it with a Tilt file that's a subset of Python that, in a simple case, looks like, looks almost declarative. Hey, I have some Kubernetes YAML. Hey, in order to deploy that, you need to do a Docker build of this image from this directory and that image from that directory. And also, I want you to set up a port forward, so I don't need to bother with like an ingress or service. I can just talk to it on my laptop. But what about more complex cases? So we know that we can't pull off there are some tools, Kubernetes itself, Bazel, that say like, hey, I'm going to give you like the best dang experience ever if you just completely rethink how you do, builds or production or whatever. And as a result, they can take a very long time to adopt. And we're a small company, we can't do that. And I call that style of onboarding where you have to like completely rethink what you're doing, Mr. T onboarding, because I pity the fool who has to onboard in that way. Mr. T was a wrestler and entertainer. Was he a wrestler? Doesn't seem that important. We have a different approach where we do Mr. Rogers onboarding. Fred Rogers, a Pittsburgh resident, Presbyterian minister, longtime children's television show host, always said, I like you just the way you are. Tilt likes your project just the way it is. And so we want you to be able to reuse what you already have. So you don't have to have YAML that's checked in. You can, use Helm or customize or YAML, or you can run a script to generate YAML, or you can run a script to list the files that you need to generate YAML. You can use a custom builder, whether that's Bazel if you've gone there, or source to image, or Jib, or so many. You can actually have flags for Tilt that aren't defined by Tilt, but are defined like for what makes sense for your team, so that you can have, some trade-offs. You can say like, hey, I want to, do something that's fast but dangerous, and you can let each user kind of pick what they're comfortable with. You can say which images you want to be editing versus which you want to be using from CI. But I think, perhaps the biggest way that we want to work with your project, that Tilt likes your project just the way it is. And I hope I'm not, about to be, and sorry, I just want to clarify that this is what I was saying. Like, we want you to be able to reuse what you have from CI, or be able to use Tilt in CI. And there are ways, I'll be totally honest, where we, don't live up to this promise, and you should come, order a pitchfork off Amazon and, come menace me with it, or I guess, mail me a pitchfork and I'll get the message. Because this is a Kubernetes meetup, but we also think about Tilt for non-Kubernetes, because many multi-service apps, even if they're using, even if production runs in Kubernetes, don't actually use Kubernetes as they're developing, right? They maybe just run each binary as a separate process and, recompile it. And there's lots of reasons to do this. It avoids image builds, networking pains, the cost of, it avoids all of the pains that Kubernetes causes, but you're still having all of the pains that come from being multi-service that Tilt can solve. And so in fact, like, yeah, do dev however you do it, Kubernetes, Docker Compose, bare processes, like bring your own orchestrator, and you still get this better workflow engine and a better holistic UI to actually like be the right tool, to be that SimCity for your app. And just because I get asked this a lot, and maybe not a lot of people are, talking about it at the right level, like, there's this question that comes up, like, should I use Kubernetes in my inner loop? And what I'd say is, hey, if you're deploying to Kubernetes, you're always sometimes going to have to do development on Kubernetes to track down Kubernetes only issues. And maybe you're all right with that being, really painful and just a bunch of like, Docker build and kubectl apply, because, it's like one person does it, once every couple months. And I know why so many, DevOps or ops or developer experience owners really want to go full on dev on Kubernetes only, because then you don't have to maintain one environment. You don't have to maintain multiple dev environments, especially if you also have CI thrown into the mix. You reduce the kind of bad surprises that you get when something, seems to be working, and then you send it out to production and like, whoops. And I think just, hey, this is how we should be doing development. It's like where the unicorns roam. That's where I want to get to. And I think people who are excited about this like Dev 2.0, like we'll do it right this time, miss how hard just there's such a long tail of issues that pop up. And when they pop up is like when you're trying to roll them out. And so suddenly they're on the critical path, or, so you're either like overwhelmed trying to roll it out, or you're the user who is, having your development experience get worse. And so if you're in this boat, like, please talk to me, because if, I understand why you want to get to Dev 2.0 faster. And I think there's even a path where this can be a little counterintuitive, but having more steps that are smaller can like let you get where you're looking to go faster. If you first like, know that Dev 2.0 is like, possible, and then use Tilt to kind of make a Dev 1.5 that's still using bare processes, but sorry, wow. That's using the like bare processes that you've been using, but give a new coat of paint that improves productivity, and then you can like gain credibility and get promoted when you roll that out and remove Dev 1.0. And then, like I was saying with Tilt flags, you can make it that people can be switching back and forth and dipping their toes in the water, and helping you pull out issues that you can solve, which is going to be hard, but it's no longer blocking where you're trying to get to. So,
Hey, Dan,
yeah.
we got a question from the chat here.
I love questions from chat. Hi, chat.
This is from Vikram.
Hi, Vikram.
Does this integrate with any other dev tools, e.g. unit testing? If not, any plans down the road?
Yeah. Great. Yeah, I've been amazed. I'll give you an example of a tool that I think is even bigger than unit testing, Bazel. We have people who use Bazel to build each binary and each service, but then so like there will be 15 Bazel invocations, one for each service, and then it's Tilt that like keeps them all together. And so to Tilt, and there's this is docs.tilt.dev, which I just pulled up because I imagined there would be questions. We have custom build scripts, Bazel build scripts. I think we don't have one explicitly for like unit testing, but so I think I want to go to the API reference, which I think will answer your question, because you do a like local resource, which just takes a shell command. And so you'd have a command to like run your unit test that would watch the files, that it changes, and then you can see your unit testing there. And you can even have dependencies between resources if you wanted something like, don't bother deploying this service until its unit tests pass. Am I answering the right question?
Yes, Vikram says understood. Great.
Cool.
Another question from chat is from Lamadi. Awesome talk. How does Tilt differ from telepresence?
Oh, this is a fantastic question. So thank you. Really, really insightful. Yeah, to get at that. I don't think I have any. Yeah, explicit slides. Yeah, panes of Kubernetes developer experience. So telepresence by DataWire, I think, is like a way that you can, doing some cool stuff with networking, actually like be running code on your machine and it's subbing in for something in the data center or in the cluster. And so you don't have any of these, it solves these panes of the Kubernetes developer experience. But it's almost like we've taken very different, almost like opposite approaches, where Tilt's about, hey, your app is a distributed system. You have to think of it like a distributed system. Whereas telepresence is maybe like an ostrich, like ignore the other pieces of your distributed system, just use them as they are. And so telepresence is like a pretty good way to stay in the, you know, on the level of, you know, single service development. And so it can help you if you're really just doing single service development. What we see is even if you're only changing the code of one service, you know, being able to see what's happening in like logs in other services is pretty important. And so, yeah, I hope that is answering your question, and I'd love follow-ups. And, you know, if you want to chat with me, you know, after or, you know, on some other day, I'd love to dig into that. So I'm going to move on until I hear more from Lamati, which I guess is French for the Matty. Great. And thanks for, yeah, sticking with me. I maybe have not that much more even, and maybe I should have more, being, you know, taking up the main spot. But yeah, you know, like lots of tools are seen as cost centers. They get bug fixes. You know, like you can add kind of specific features, but we really take pride in building Tilt as a product. My co-founder and I have worked on like, you know, real products like Google Sheets and Google Docs and Google Forms. Or Nick went off and worked at Medium on the editor, if you've ever, you know, think pieced or thought led. And so I think like, yeah, and this kind of gets at a comparison to telepresence, like that kind of web experience to give you a holistic view is expensive to build, but we really think gets at how like Tilt isn't just about like getting code into the data center or into, you know, one binary. It's about letting you see what's happening so you can close the loop on feedback. And even more than being a product, we actually think about like personas and all the kinds of things you do when you're a company that maybe I yeah, wish I didn't have to do, but I do it so you don't have to, of thinking about the difference between like who's developing the application versus who's owning the developer experience. And we have lots of tips and tricks on how to do DevX right. So we have this new site that's not about hawking Tilt, but about, oh, I didn't even realize he's animated when I hovered over, but about just generally like how developer experience could be better. That wasn't the right window switch. And all right, I'm going to try something and we'll see if it works. Or maybe I'll see it failed and lie to the rest of you. We have this idea of like Tilt Cloud of being infrastructure for when production is a coworker's laptop. So if I go into my Tilt and, you know, let's say that I have some kind of, hopefully this won't compile, and I'm like, hey, what's happening? You know, I can see that it's red, and maybe I don't know what that means. I can create a snapshot. What's a snapshot, you ask? Well, you know, trust the narrative. I'm going to go into the chat here. And oh, you know, unfortunately, we should fix this. Zoom breaks URLs, so you're going to have to actually copy the equal sign at the end in. But if you open that, you should be able to see the same thing that I saw, that you saw on my screen, working for you. And so this is a way that, like, we think that us being, you know, a company, not just a tool, means that we can like run and maintain this kind of service, where you can actually share the context and like get rid of the problems where you're playing a game of telephone in Slack when someone's saying, hey, is the shopping cart service broken for anyone else? Well, what are you seeing? This. Oh no, like copy and paste up. From that view, you can still click in and slice and dice in all the ways that I could. You can't, you know, do anything because, hey, that's my, you know, my computer. So that's, let's see, great. Yeah, actually thinking about it. So, yeah, though that more to come on that in general, but I just kind of want to thank you because I just ran through a bunch of different things just about how Tilt, and I think how you should just demand that when you're doing multi-service development, what your experience should be like. And so as we have hung out, I've kind of told you I want you to hear that if you use Kubernetes in prod, you need Tilt for dev, and in parentheses, even if you don't use Kubernetes for dev, because it operates at the right level to solve the pains of multi-service development. It's optimized for Kubernetes. It fits into your workflow, whatever it is. No shame or judgment because of Mr. Rogers. And we have a team behind it that can help your team work better in this new world. And if you want to, here's a Calendly link where you can, I'd love to hear, you know, what you're doing with development and see if there's a way that I can help. Or I'm Dan at tilt.dev. Thanks to Alex and Joe for organizing. And here's a photo of my cat Cricket in a container. He's a Triger, a three-legged cat. I figure if you, put up with me talking like this for this long, you deserve something cute. And thank you for being a great audience from what I can tell in this weird world. And I'd love to, you know, stay around and chat or take questions or, you know, comments, insults, doubts, prevarications, dilemmas, whatever you got.
Yeah, I think, thanks again, Dan. I think we got some closing remarks in our normal like meetup flow.
Great.
But we do usually hang around and chat and geek out and such afterwards. So please stick around. Alex.
Yeah. So again, thanks Dan for coming out and talking. Thanks for Eldon for doing your lightning talk. That was super informative. I definitely have some people I want to put in touch with you, Dan, that I think you could be real helpful to at my dollar day job. So in the theme of awesome speakers, if you want to come and be a great speaker like Eldon or Dan, hit us up. We're always looking for new speakers. You can submit a talk to katesatl@gmail.com. You can hit us up through meetup.com. You can find us on Tech 404, or, you know, open an issue even on the GitHub repo. We're easy to find. We'd love to have people come out and talk, more people from the community, more great people like Dan, anybody, you know, in between. You know, things like this are community driven and doesn't work without you. So please reach out and hit us up. I do also want to call out, we are begging for YouTube subscribers because we want to set up a vanity URL. We're currently at about 25 subscribers to the Kubernetes ATL YouTube channel. We record all of these meetups and post them up. There's over a year's worth of content up there now. If you want to go check it out and you think it's worthwhile, please subscribe. So once we hit 100, we can have a vanity URL and start sharing that a lot easier.
Yeah, I just adding on to that. So I just posted 2 new links that we set up to make it slightly easier to find our meetup notes and videos rather than like a bazillion character GUID link to YouTube and different things like that, you know. So our community on Meetup has, we just crossed like 2,100 members in the community. So I figure pandering a little bit to get 100 people to click that subscribe button on YouTube is not too much far-reaching effort, but yeah. And if you have any ideas around, you know, how we're handling things as far as how we're breaking up the like this month in Kubernetes and things like that, or any topics in general that you would find interesting that we can search for some great speakers on, please let us know.
Yep. We've also just posted this morning, we posted the August meetup. We've got 2 speakers coming out that both look like really great topics. One is Steve Wade from Metal. He's doing a lot of speaking around the Kubernetes community. Really sharp guy, great speaker. And the other is Marky Jackson, who, if you're interested in the open source world and you don't know who Marky is, then you're missing out. All around great human being, great member of the community. You should really come out and hear him speak. He'll be with us next month. It looks like we don't have any other questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And in a minute, we'll go ahead and set everybody to wide open so we can socialize. Thanks for coming out, everybody.